Kaikeyi, Chapter 5. The day after we returned to Kaikeyi, I made my request to Yutajit. Why are you so intent on this anyway? He asked. But I noticed he did not say no. You will never have need of it. Father and the soldiers were able to bring down a Rakshasa with their training, I said. If it had caught us, you would have stood more of a chance than I. I want to be able to protect myself. He stayed silent, observing my face. So I added, it won't hurt you at all to train me. Haven't you heard the master say that teaching a skill helps perfect it? So in that regard, you will be improving too. And that was all it took. The Rakshasa had left us both shaken, and perhaps Yutajit felt the need to protect me. It seemed I didn't need the binding plane all the time. He refused to do it anywhere we might be found out. So we took our horses into the fields, riding beyond the view of prying eyes. As soon as we dismounted, I went immediately to his saddlebag, eager to see what weapons he had chosen for our first lesson. My hands itched to hold a bow, for I found archery most elegant, but perhaps wooden staffs would be more practical, more like what would be found in a forest. It was empty. What? The instructors at the palace do not give us weapons for years, he said. Years? I asked, incredulity coloring my voice. He laughed. I will not make you wait that long, but I think maybe it would be helpful to show you some forms first. Without that, you may as well ride home and ask Mantra to help you practice your embroidery. I scowled at that, but watched him intently as he moved slowly through a series of stretches and exercises. As he repeated the motions, I began to follow along, relishing the stretch and pull of my muscles, the solid ground beneath my feet, the brush of wind against my braids. I had always thought myself fit, racing around with my brothers and riding as I did, but by the end of it, I could barely mount my horse. My whole body trembled. Does it always feel this way? I asked him. What way? He said. I did not answer, too tired and frustrated with my own abilities. What way? He asked again. Nothing, I muttered, but I vowed that my weakness would not last. I would master these forms and prove to Yutajit I could handle weapons. Every day I practiced the forms alone in my room. Each time left me drenched in sticky sweat, but I pushed through, celebrating every small victory. Only Mantra knew of my determination to succeed in this. Even with Yutajit, I feigned a certain amount of casualness. For I sensed that there was danger in letting him know the depth of my longing to prove myself worthy. But Mantra sometimes observed me, struggling to balance on my hands or hold a lunge as she tidied my room. Once she asked, why do you do this when you have so many other things to spend your time on? Why shouldn't I responded, panting with the effort. I dropped to the ground, brushed stray hair from my eyes and turned to face Mantra, whose expression was pinched. I had been rather rude. I'm sorry, I added. I could not articulate this need to learn. Mantra eyed me intently. You do not need to be able to fight, she said. You will be Ratni of a kingdom one day. That will be all the power you need. In a way, she was right. I was learning my own power more and more each day as I took over duties of the court. This had recently come to a head with Danteri, my mother's former chief lady-in-waiting. I would never forget her whispered conversation with Prasad the night my mother had vanished, as she held her tongue in exchange for control of the palace workings. In the week before Holi, Mantra had taken me to the kitchens to hear the plans for the celebration that would follow the great bonfire. Every year, we burned an effigy of the Holika, a wicked Asura, who had tried to immolate her devout nephew alive. Burning the effigy could cleanse our kingdom and bring a good harvest. The supplies were limited for the feast. The usual caravans that would bring grain and rice had been delayed, and only after the harvest would our kitchens be replenished. I listened carefully to our cook, and when Mantra nodded, encouraged him to use our flour stores to prepare vadas, delicious balls of dough mixed with fragrant herbs, then fried until they were golden and sizzling before being dipped in a tangy yogurt. Our bins of dried chickpeas were plentiful, which means we would be able to prepare my father's favorite spice stew. And it was decided that we would slaughter several chickens besides, those who had become too old to lay. I felt a pang for the chickens, but overall was quite pleased with myself, until the next day when Danteri came to confront Mantra. I heard you spoke to the cook, Danteri said without any pleasantries. I did, Mantra began. It is my place to make such decisions until the Yuvratni is able, Danteri continued. I will ensure that Prasad hears about this. I cannot imagine he would want to keep you around after. It was me, I blurted, not wanting Mantra to get into trouble for my actions. I spoke to the cook. Danteri stopped. Her expression fell slightly before she marshaled a thin-lipped smile. I see, Yuvratni, but you're still so young. You should not console yourself with such matters. I want to, I said, stepping forward. It is my role, is it not? Mantra coughed behind me, or perhaps it was a laugh. Danteri's eyes flashed up to Mantra, then back down to me. Perhaps the Raja would want a more capable... I hope you're not saying Kaikeyi is not capable, Mantra said behind me. There was an unpleasant note to her voice, one I had never heard before. I have been doing this for some time, Danteri said. It is simply that I am more experienced. It is laudable that you want to help. In that case, it is my place to assist you. I appreciate your help, I said, for Mantra had always taught me to be generous. But I do not believe I need your assistance. You don't need it? Danteri asked, and now she looked a bit afraid, although I did not know why. I looked to Mantra, confused, but she gave me a small smile and a nod. No, I do not. If these responsibilities are mine, I should be the one to handle them. Danteri looked at Mantra. She seemed sad now, only moments after looking so angry, and I did not understand. She pivoted on her heel and walked away so briskly she might have been running. It was only after the feast, at which Danteri did not appear, that I realized what I had done. I had all but dismissed her. Of course she might have stayed, but her place would have fallen, and she was unwilling to bear that. Once I had fully claimed my role, she had no reason to stay. This was a different sort of power than the binding plane, and it didn't feel good, even when Mantra assured me that Danteri's departure was inevitable, and I was simply doing my duty. I remembered how I felt when my father disbelieved me, dismissed my dream, and then trusted Yutajit in the same breath. The despair that had rocked me the first evening after he sent my mother away. Even a Radni did not have the power to stay with her children, or a Yuvradni to gain the trust of her father. That would not be my whole life. I wanted to have power over myself, and I did not have that. In that regard, I was no different than Danteri. This discomfort was still on my mind when I explained to Mantra why I wanted to fight. She must have observed something in the set of my jaw and the clench of my fists that gave her pause. If it makes you feel strong, then by all means do it. But you do not need to prove yourself to anyone. If Yutajit has put you up to anything... No, I interrupted. He thinks I am foolish as well. I do not think you are foolish, Mantra said gently. She moved in front of me and secured a strand of runaway hair with a pin, giving me a small smile. It is admirable that you want to improve yourself. I just fear you will have little use for such things. I'm sure it is hard to live here surrounded by men, but there are other ways to be strong. You're already learning. See how the palace staff admire you? Can I not be strong in many ways? I asked her. I want to learn this for myself. Of course, Mantra picked up my dirty clothes, her expression grave. You are your own mistress. Yutajit stayed true to his word and his teachings. As time passed, he began bringing weapons to our lessons. First, a simple bow. He stood behind me as I drew the string, lifting my elbow, correcting my stance, giving encouragement. It was hard work that left my arms numb, and so between lessons I began lifting objects around my room to gain strength. After several months, Yutajit set up a range of targets for me throughout the hills. I ran across the grass, and each time I spotted a target, I planted my feet, pulled the bowstring back, and let loose. Yutajit followed behind me, shouting with joy at each hit. Some targets were far away, and when I pulled the string back as far as it would stretch, my arm did not tremble. Others required me to crest an incline. and yet my thighs did not burn. For almost an hour, I practiced, and when we studied the targets at the end, nearly every arrow had hit the center. I flopped onto the grass afterwards, tired from the exertion. I closed my eyes for a moment. With both of us lying sweaty in the dirt, I could imagine that I had been a warrior my whole life. After Yuthajit insisted that I learn how to drive a war chariot, even though what I really wanted was to learn how to use a sword. I had cautiously begun re-entering the binding plane, using only the gentlest of touches on the strings and threads around me, and withdrawing at even the smallest tremor. So I sent a suggestion, just a tiny push, across our blue cord. Would sword fighting not be more fun? Our kingdom is known far and wide for its horsemanship, he insisted. You know how to ride? Driving is what you need to master next. And reluctant to test him or our bond, I complied. At our next meeting, I arrived at our usual spot and found him waiting there with 2 matched horses and a chariot he had clearly stolen from the palace grounds. The horses tossed their heads, nickering, and I rubbed their noses in affection before examining the chariot myself. It was large, designed to be swift and easily maneuvered. I ran a hand against the wood, marveling that something so vicious could feel so smooth. You can observe while I drive them in a simple circle, he said. The day was a beautiful one, so I settled on the rock on the side of the hill to watch. It went well at first, but after a few minutes, the horses seemed to decide they preferred to run in a straight line. He struggled to get them back up in control, eventually pulling them to a halt and dropping the reins in disgust. He hopped down from the chariot, face red, and any jibing remark I was considering slipped from my mind. You did very well, I told him sincerely. I don't know what happened, he growled. Shall I try? He shrugged half-heartedly, so I climbed into the box of the chariot and took the reins in my hands. As I stood behind the team of horses, adrenaline rushed through me. I flicked the reins and the horses began moving forward, slowly at first, then faster. The box was steady beneath me and I felt as though the world had slowed. I tugged instinctively on the reins, bracing my weight, and the team turned in a smooth arc. My heart pounded in my chest, light and free. I pulled a bit harder and the horses responded, pulling in a steady circle. The grin that split my face was not a conscious choice. I snapped the reins and the chariot leapt forward, but I kept my balance. I was the one with the wheels, the horses, the world. We danced our way across the field until at last the surge of power buoying me began to fade and I remembered my audience. I climbed down from the chariot, trying to force my cheeks into a more reserved expression. Yuthajit's face was stony, his shoulders hunched in a palpable frustration, and I felt a slight churn of guilt. You were a good teacher, I said. No, I wasn't, he said, and seemed to shake himself. But you were excellent, Kaikeyi. I had truly not been expecting such praise. Really? You're a natural. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, then gave me a small smile. Maybe in this you can teach me. So Yuthajit passed down the words of his instructors and memories, and how maneuvers were supposed to look while I figured out how to get the horses to actually respond. And in the end, we taught each other together. We practiced through the harvest and the cooler season, bundling ourselves in coarse woolen cloaks to stay warm. It was cold enough to see our breath, but we knew that in a few months, our chariot practice would come to a halt for some time, and the air warmed. As the air warmed, it came with a warning that rains would not be far behind. The ground would turn to mud, and while horse riding was still permissible, charioteering was not. The mud would break in one moment what craftsmen had labored over for months. One evening, storm clouds loomed on the horizon and the air was almost damp with moisture. And we rode out in silent agreement that this would be our last practice. But when we arrived at our usual place, I saw there was a second chariot already there with horses. I looked around, worried we had been found out by some disapproving advice. Stop looking so serious, Yutajit said with a laugh. I brought it out here just before, then rode back to get you. But how? I asked. Wouldn't it be strange if... Nobody asked such questions. Yutajit hopped down, face bright with excitement at his own ingenuity, and I bit my tongue. I was questioned all the time by advisors, by the nobility. Where was I going? What was I doing? Why was I not elsewhere? This was perhaps the most useful application of the binding plane. It was slowly becoming instinct to redirect any unwanted inquiries. I would grasp a bond with my mind, pull ever so slightly on the rope between us while suggesting, you have important business elsewhere, or Kaikeyi is very responsible and you need not worry. I thought we could practice against each other. I eyed him, skeptical. There's no point in two charioteers practicing against each other unless they're carrying warriors. I could tell from the way he blinked up at me that he had not thought this fully through. His expression fell slightly, and I immediately felt sorry. He had gone to a lot of effort to surprise me with this. You know what? I said. Maybe we can make it a contest through the forest path. There's plenty of obstacles. That would be a wonderful practice. Yutajit smiled so widely, I could have counted his teeth. Shall we race to the river? He asked, excited. There was a small river running several hundred paces from where we stood. Soon it would be swollen and dangerous, but that was many hours away. I gave him a nod and he clambered into his chariot, steering the team into place next to mine. Ready? He called. 3, 2, I counted, drawing it out and tensing my body. 1, Yutajit shouted, growing impatient. He took off. I snapped the reins and sent the horses running to catch him. We jostled for room on the path and he used his narrow lead to block me time and time again. I snarled in frustration, scanning the quickly passing surroundings for an opening. Yutajit let out a whoop as I slowed my horses slightly, then turned his head confused as I swung my team to the side. The chariot bumped uncomfortably over the uneven trail, giving a groan, but I gripped the reins and spurred the horses onward. They were racing now, the chariot lifting slightly into the air. When we burst back onto the main path, we nearly collided with Yutajit. My heart leapt into my mouth, but I made myself hold firm, and he, in an equal amount of panic, slowed his team, allowing me to take the lead. He cursed behind me, and I felt his horses nudging my chariot. With a flick of my wrist, I sent the horses weaving along the path so that he could gain no advantage. The river was in sight. With a whoop of my own, I spurred the horses, slowing only as we reached the edge, their hooves splashing into the shallow water, droplets cooling my flushed skin. I leapt up from my chariot, all decorum forgotten. I threw my arms up and cheered and spun around to find my brother. Yutajit climbed down from his chariot and stalked towards me, lips pressed into a line. I held up a conciliatory hand, but before I could ask if he was all right, he tackled me into the river. I shouted, indignant, as the cold water hit my back, the shock setting my teeth chattering. I wonder if this has been a bad idea. I should have let Yutajit win, but he rolled away laughing so hard he was nearly crying. And as I caught my breath lying in the shallows, I quickly entered the binding plane. Our bright blue bond was calm, undisturbed, and so I turned to look at him. He was on his knees preparing to stand and was looking at me with open admiration. You were incredible, he offered me a hand up. Then why did you throw me into the water? I asked, shivering slightly. You're too serious all the time, he said, putting his arm around me. Yutajit radiated heat. I wanted to set you off balance. That look on your face when I threw you in? He grinned. Remember, Kaikeyi, never take your eyes off your enemy. He put on a serious face, but I snickered at his pronouncement, and soon we were both choking with laughter. You're not my enemy, I told him, elbowing him in the ribcage. Just my competitor. But we should get back and change before we take ill. He gave me a good-natured groan, but willingly followed me home. Mantra, I need to practice my sword play, I said one evening. The monsoons were well and truly here, and watching the ground become a lake of mud outside the palace was boring me to tears. I itched to move. Can you help me? She laughed slightly. I know nothing about sword play. All you need is to stand and hold a shield, I said. I could tell she was resistant to the idea. And so I sent a plea in the blinding plain. Kaikeyi most fervently desires that it would make her happy. I had learned that such entreaties worked best with mantra. I worried sometimes that she only humored me because she had to, but then mantra would, when she thought I was asleep, whisper in my ear how much she loved me, and I would put the thought from my mind. She hummed, considering. Stand and hold a shield, she asked. I don't have to use a sword. No, I said, already turning to find the shield in an anticipation of victory. All right. I picked up the wooden circle and turned back to her when she added, Then you must do something for me. What do you want? I asked cautiously. If Mantra needed something from me, would she not have already asked for it? I suppose really it'll be helping you. For every blow you deal me, you must correctly answer a question about the court. I groaned. Oh, that is so boring. I know everything I need to. Do you? Mantra took the shield from me and slotted her arm in place. You attend all the functions, that is true, and you're well liked among the staff. But I think you could be doing more. Though if, as you say, you know everything already, then this should be very easy. I slipped into the binding plane, more than ready to convince her that I did not need such childish lessons. I touched our bond with my mind, and then actually listened to her words. She was right, this would be easy. And if I manipulated away her condition now, it would only come back in some other form later. Instead, I could prove to her that I already knew everything I needed. I picked up the wooden sword and did a basic approach, wrapping the shield with my blade to finish. It was a far cry from the double-edged kanda the best warriors fought with. But even so, I struggled to maneuver with it. Very nice, Mantra said, although I could tell she didn't really care. Your father is inviting a guest this evening. What is his name? That was easy. Tarush. I tried a more complicated maneuver, hitting the shield from the side. Arya Tarush, I repeated, adding a title of respect. Why has he been invited here? I knew that too. Father just took over his land. Kaikeyi's borders had remained stable for some time now. The kingdom of Kosala, which lay in the southeast, its territory beginning just across the Saraswati River, had recently conquered a cluster of smaller villages that had been causing us trouble. With our southern border secured, my father had taken this as an opportunity to wage war on some northern tribes that were posing a nuisance before they had a chance to become stronger. Mantra lowered the shield and gave me a level stare. You think your father invites all those whose land he has conquered to his home as an honored guest? I frowned at her. He wants to make sure Arya Tarish won't try to fight this? That's better. She lifted up her shield again. I took several spinning steps, tripped and missed Mantra by several paces. She laughed, but there was no ridicule in it. I laughed as well, shaking my arm out before trying again, concentrating on my footwork this time. I managed a weak hit against the shield. What should the palace do to ensure that your father's plan succeeds? I truly paused. At that, the sword dropping to my side. What do you mean? There's a feast for his arrival. You believe that's all it takes? It's a great honor, I insisted. Would you be honored to sit in the hall of your enemy after you were defeated by their hands? I bit my lip. I suppose not. It sounded rather humiliating. I searched my mind for what else might be required. He should be seated close to my father, and perhaps the kitchens could prepare foods from the north. These people are almost from the mountains. We can serve mutton as a show of respect. Mantra nodded. That is one way. She lifted the shield once more, but now I was curious. What other ways are there? She raised an eyebrow at me. I thought you knew everything. At my frustrated glare, she smiled slightly and continued. We should ensure his chamber is comfortable and laid out in the fashion he is used to. Uncomfortable beds make for uncomfortable men. He should be served immediately after the king, before all others. He should be well attended, with a servant within shouting range at all times. And he has a friend in the court. Do you know who that might be? I shook my head. Devi Tara is his sister, although she left his lands when she married Arya Karthik many years ago. We should make sure that she is seated near him and treated as an important figure so he knows his family is taken care of and respected. How do you know all this? I asked, swordplay entirely forgotten. Because I listen. You should know all this too. Raise your weapon, Kaikeyi. We will practice until you are ready. That is the end of chapter 5 of Kaikeyi. I usually don't do this footnote after my recording, but I thought this is something that I would start with. What really kind of stood out for me in this particular chapter is obviously Kaikeyi kind of getting the reins of what's happening in the palace, and what was really touching is also her relationship with her twin brother, a brother who really treated her as an equal in a time when men and women were treated very differently, and also a lovely relationship with Manthara. Okay, I'll probably post another recording next week, I hope. Bye.